What's the best way to learn PKing in old school RuneScape? LMS? Rev caves? Maybe wildy bosses? I honestly don't know. I'm still learning myself, and the deeper I get into PvP, the more complex it becomes. I've thought a lot about how to make a useful guide for new PKers, but with so much to learn, no single video can realistically cover everything. So instead, this series will cover PvP one piece at a time. Over multiple videos, we'll break down the basics, slowly and properly. I'm not a PvP prodigy, and that's exactly the point. My mistakes are still fresh, and I've learned a lot from them. Hopefully, so will you. This is a noob's guide to the wilderness.
I risk 100k. In not dying, bro. Dog ass. What the fuck are you doing?
There are a few things as annoying as trying to kill some low-risk rag set, flaming you and bragging about how he barely ate, just to have him get away, leaving you filled with frustration and downing confidence. Luckily for us bad PKers, you also run into a bunch of people who just fall over without you even having to do much. The difference is knowing how to tank. Whether you're a PVMer struggling to survive a half TB, or a PKer who too often takes consecutive 30s while frantically trying to catch a freeze in your mystic robes, whatever you do in the wilderness, tanking is required to some extent. I've decided to start with the defensive in this series, as I believe just falling over against every half-decent PK you run into can be very demotivating and might lead to new PKers giving up hope before really getting into it. So let's learn how to survive first, then we'll get to killing people afterwards. Tanking is all about minimizing the DPS that your aggressor can deal towards you, while making sure you don't get KO'd. There are 4 main ways to achieve this. Keeping your HP high, getting protection prayers right, staying in your tank gear, and moving when unfrozen. Let's first tackle eating and praying right, since these two are highly connected to each other, and probably the most basic in terms of tanking. Eating in Deep Wild is different from many other activities. Because you want to survive for as long as possible, an invent filled with regular foods isn't cutting it. You'll want to bring mainly brews, since they heal much more than regular fish. You'd also like a few combo foods for quickly healing up in low HP situations, as well as some super restorers to regain your stats and prayer. Make sure you're using blighted anglerfish, karambwans and restorers, as they are much cheaper than the real versions. The most common mistake in eating is spam clicking your food while not even looking at your prayer book. Let me show you how this looks from the PK's perspective. As you see, I can almost go make myself a cup of coffee and still get the kill. If the PKer doesn't have to do anything, the odds of him making a mistake are little to none. So you have to make him work a little by switching your prayers between attacks. You'll want to be going back and forth between your inventory and prayers all the time. When you eat food in old school RuneScape, there's a 1.8 second or 3 tick delay before you can eat again. So in order to use your time effectively, you want to sip a brew whenever you can, then switch to your prayer book and try to predict your opponent's next attack, then switch back to your invent and sip brew when you can and need to. After 3 brew sips, you'll want to sip a restore as well, since brewing decreases your mage level and thereby also your mage defense. The exact ratio of brew to restores is 1 to 3, meaning the stat decrease of 3 brew sips is reset by 1 sip of restore. If you're fighting for your life, you may of course need to brew more than 3 times in a row, but just be aware that you'll need more than 1 restore sip to get your stats back up. So if you switch to your spellbook and see the barrage icon gone, it's usually because you brewed down below 94 mage. I'd also advise you to bring a few more restores than the 1 to 3 ratio, as you might still need prayer in situations where you don't have to brew, and you'd just rather die with a restore left than getting smited for your +1. In the beginning, this can be quite difficult. It's easy to drink your brews too early, you might forget to use your restorers, and predicting your opponent's attack style takes some practice before you get a feel for it. But as long as you get used to this back and forth switching between invent and prayers, you'll learn the rest over time. Just don't spam click your food. If your opponent gets you below around 65 to 70 HP, you'll want to use a combo food. There are a few foods in the game that can be eaten right after a regular food, without the 1.8 second delay. These are karambwans or helibuts and Saradom and brews, which technically works as a potion that heals you, allowing you to use it as a combo food. That's why you want to bring a few fish along with your brews. I usually bring 2 to 3 anglers and 1 karambwan. To do a double eat, you'll first want to click your fish, then brew on the same game tick. Just think of it as a two-way switch really. You have to eat the fish first though, as brew into angler won't work. If you get below around 45 HP, you want to do a triple eat. This is just adding a Karambon to the end of your double eat, so you do the fish, then brew, then Karambon. Again, just think of it as a three-way switch, and for this reason, try to have a place in your invent where all three of these foods are fairly close, making it easier to click them all on the same tick. For a successful triple eat, the order have to be fish, brew, Karambon. Double eats can also be fish to Karambon or brew to Karambon, but I'd mainly advise doing fish to brew. First of all, this is the only double that allows overhealing above 99 HP, and also using the Karam in a double eat means you have one less triple eat for later in the fight. Brew to Karam can also be good situationally if you run out of normal fish at some point. What you can't do is brew to fish or Karambon to any of the other two. You can clip this image if you want a quick overview of correct combo eats to remind yourself. Double eating is fairly straightforward if your invent is set up right, but triple eating can be difficult in a stressful situation. Again, just think of this as 2 or 3-way switches, and you'll get better as switching also improves. Getting protection prayers right is very much a feel thing, and there aren't many rules to follow as it's mostly just learned with experience. One good thing to keep in mind regarding prayers though is to switch your prayers as close as possible to your opponent's next attack. It's very common for new PKs to see an attack, pray what you expect right away, and then don't switch until you've been hit again. Praying like this is very intuitive when inexperienced, just reacting to what you see, but it will keep you on the back foot against any decent PKer, as you will end up praying too late most of the time. If the PKer sees you switch to pray melee early, he'll just keep his melee weapon on to fake you, then switch to another attack style right before his attack. What you want to do is switch your prayers right before he's about to attack you. Can you predict this perfectly? By no means. But as the fight goes on, you'll begin to realize his attack patterns and make the needed adjustments. You need to see this from your opponent's perspective. Let's show it real simple here. Say you expect the next attack to be range. Instead of switching pray range instantly like in this example, you want to wait a little, so the PK can't just change his attack style. So if you see your opponent attacking with range and you expect him to go for melee for his next attack, try to hold off showing the melee prayer for a few ticks, then a tick before he hits you, switch to pray melee. The key difference is that if you show pray melee too early, a good PK will have time to switch up his attack style, even if he was gonna melee you initially. It's by no means a problem to switch a prayer early, as long as you also switch it late. Say you switch to pray melee right after his attack, the PK most likely won't melee you. So if you switch to pray range or mage again, depending on what you expect, there's a good chance you'll get it right. Should you realize during the fight that the PK just isn't that good and pulls his own switches way too early, you might give him a few freebies at first, but it's a much easier adjustment to make than the other way around. The key difference is reacting to what your opponent does versus predicting his next attack. We'll dive deeper into that in another video. I wouldn't call this a rule, but it's a good thing to look out for if you find yourself in a frustrating situation of switching your prayers a lot, but still getting hit off pray every time. Or if you have the feeling of always being a little too late with your prayer switches. At the end of the day, protection prayers really just comes with practice. The more good PKs you've had to tank, the better you'll get. Staying in your tank gear is really quite simple. The tank gear is the switches you bring that give the best defensive stats. For new PKers using a 3-way switch, this will be your range or tank top and bottom, and your staff. The staff is the least important since it mainly gives mage defense. What is important though is your top and bottoms, as mage gear generally have terrible defensive bonuses. You essentially only want to wear ropes on the ticks that you are casting spells. Sounds simple, right? Well, when you're busy sweating and shaking and eating and praying, this is an easy one to forget. Because of this, I still see a lot of stressed out PKs trying to catch a freeze and taking massive amounts of damage in their mage ropes while doing so. Catching a freeze when you're frozen and your opponent is in melee range is great if you know what you're doing. But if you don't, you risk having your food dwindle down in a heartbeat while also leaving yourself vulnerable to being specced out. In my opinion, the most noob-friendly way to go about this is to only go for freezes when the PK is at a distance. When you're unfrozen and begin running away, try to equip your mage ropes and prepare a freeze cast, so when you eventually get refrozen, you can freeze the PK back immediately. With good freeze RNG, you can avoid having the PK in melee range, which is a much safer position for you to be in. If you splash and the PK closes the distance, just get back in your tank and forget about freezing him back until you're unfrozen again. This way you can focus on eating and praying when frozen and hopefully take minimal damage while doing so. This is a case where I'd actually advise new PKs not to do the optimal thing, as freezing your opponent is a good idea if you can equip your mage ropes, send the freeze and go back in your tank very quickly. Having your opponent frozen prevents him from DDing under you or stressing you out with constant back and forth ice skating, and it also keeps him frozen when you decide to run, allowing you to gain some distance on him. but I tend to believe it's better to keep it simple if you're completely new and focus on the defensive first. Stay in your tank and only go for freezes if your opponent is at a distance. When you get more comfortable tanking in general, you can begin freezing your opponent back in these situations. LMS is a good place to practice these freezes since dying doesn't matter anyway. Here you can flick the freeze while the PK is under you as quickly as possible, and the faster you can do this while still being somewhat precise, the better. In terms of staying in your ropes too much, I'll be the first to admit that I've been terrible at this. I found way too many clips where I'm just splashing freeze after freeze and being absolutely roasted in the process. It's tempting to stubbornly keep freezing until you finally catch one, but if you're in ropes the whole time, it's probably just not worth it. Try and just go for freezes when you have breathing room and stay in your tank the rest of the time. The next concept is also very strong if you can execute it, but not something I would emphasize too much in the very beginning, and that's fighting back when you're trying to escape. Once again, from the PK's perspective, it is much easier to kill someone just standing still when frozen, compared to someone fighting back and forcing you to eat in between your hits. So there's no question that fighting back is a great habit, even if you're not going for the kill. On the other hand, if you're brand new to this and you're already dripping sweat just getting your eats and prayers right, you shouldn't force yourself to fight back just because it's the right thing to do. Whether to fight back or not is highly situational. If your aggressor is in a max set with DFS and Serpelm, the point of sending a bunch of bolts with your range brought down to 65 is probably not worth the effort. Generally though, you should fight back as much as possible as long as it doesn't compromise your ability to switch your prayers and keep your HP high. So if you're in control of your tank and the PK doesn't seem too frightening, by all means bring some heat. Just don't let it compromise your defensive efforts too much. If your opponent is smiting, fighting back is often a good choice as you have potential to hit big and might also force him to start praying defensive instead, removing his prayer drain. But again, this is highly situational, and just as with everything else I've said, experience will teach you when you should or shouldn't hit back. My last point is almost more related to escaping, which will be the topic of the next video. But I decided to use it in this one as sort of a bridge between the two, since it also applies to situations where you aren't trying to escape. It's about remembering to utilize movement when you get unfrozen and not allowing your opponent to freeze you in the same spot multiple times. If you're escaping to a specific location, this is quite obvious, as you will of course want to move closer to the tele line, cave exit, or wherever you're trying to escape through. But even if you're taking a TB and don't have a specified destination for your escape, you should still try running around into narrow corridors or using your surroundings such as stairs or shortcuts to juke the PKer and decrease the damage he can deal to you. Again, look at the PK's perspective. It's so much easier to hit you off prayer and send special attacks at the right time if you're just standing still. When you move, he won't be able to just treat you like a target dummy, he'll usually go for a refreeze, allowing you to safely pray mage and heal up a little. In general, I would always advise you to start moving when your freeze expires, even if you're not trying to escape the fight. Good PKs usually use this for offense, going for specs or setting up a DD, but for new PKs it's a great way to slow down the fight and kill your opponent's momentum. When you're unfrozen and begin moving, your opponent will almost always try and refreeze. So you want to put on Pray Mage and Augury since it gives the best possible mage defense while running away. I actually just learned when making this video that Augury increases both melee range and mage defense by 25%, whereas Piety and Rigor only increases melee and range. So if you're only trying to tank and catch freezes, you can actually just leave Augury on at all times. Nice and simple. And in case you didn't know that little tip, how about I show you how to subscribe, like, or comment on the video, so I can bring you more tips for the future. Out of everything I've talked about in the video, that has to be the easiest to learn. Every bad PKer knows the feeling of getting constantly hit by your opponent and just not being able to keep up the pace of the fight, resulting in just wasting all your food without fighting back much. Moving away is a strategy you can use to down-tempo the fight, reset the momentum and give yourself a little time to breathe, even if you have no intention of leaving the fight. I'm getting a little off topic now, and this is really more on the subject of movement, but the point is, keep an eye out for this freeze timer and make sure to move when it expires. If you can also catch a freeze after closing some distance, you're generally in a pretty good spot. Also, whenever a freeze expires, you will always have 3 seconds or 5 ticks of immunity before you can be frozen again. So again, if you're trying to escape a PKer, you absolutely have to utilize these 3 seconds to get as much distance as possible. At the end of the day, everything I say in this video is just guidelines. What really makes you better is going out there and executing. No matter if you learn all of this backwards, you'll still get shaky and forget 95% the first time that TB lands on your head. The only way to learn this is to do it over and over again, even if it completely fails the first 20 times. The way to improve is to accept your mistakes and go again. I also know there's a bunch of stuff I didn't touch on, things like redemptioning to heal when out of food, using mage bottoms when tanking mage hits, and so on. It's all good to know, but I tend to believe that a brain already learning 10 things at once reaches a limit at some point. So what I've talked about is what I believe is the best to focus on in the beginning. And let's do a quick recap of that. If I were to start PKing today, this is what I would focus on. But honestly, most will come naturally with experience. And so will these. Because knowing how to tank is only the first part of the equation. In order to survive attacks from PKs, it has to be combined with the ability to escape successfully. Something we will look into next time. Good luck out there.